sun, a little bit of a quiet sun time, as Teacher Belay pointed out. But uh, there's other suns out there, or rather stars. Our star is our sun is many of the stars that you see in the night sky. Of course, most of the stars in the night sky are just like our star, the sun. But there are many stars in the night sky that the human eye cannot see because they're too faint, too far. And this is actually where our next presenter comes in with her research and also her art. So I'm excited to introduce a fellow Art of Planetary Science organizer, on top of obtaining a PhD, on top of making art for us, on top of coming and doing live art for us. This is Laci Brock, and she is going to do one of our very first virtual live painting streams, an art sort of a tour. She'll talk about how she completes her art and also a little bit of the research which she does, because she does look at these particular stars that are a little bit more difficult for, say, the human eye to see, but they also have other interesting planets going around them too. So it's actually weird if stars in the night sky don't have planets around them. And so Laci kind of hones in on this term that we've heard called exoplanets. And so I'm excited to introduce Laci. I'm going to go ahead and bring her to the spotlight, and then we'll go into her art next. Hey, Laci.
Hey, how's it going? Can you hear me?
Yes, it sounds good.
Awesome. Okay, I was worried because Cox Cable just not helping me out with my internet this weekend.
No, I've heard I think the U of A's had some hits too. So yeah, Cox Cable and Zoom are taking some massive hits these days.
Okay, well, I'm glad you can hear me. Thanks for the introduction and thank you for having me. This is so weird. I also don't know where to look. I'll just look into my camera if I can.
It's fine.
So, yeah, I guess if you want to know a little bit about the things that I study, I do study the atmospheres of exoplanets, but my main focus is usually brown dwarfs. And the most interesting thing about brown dwarfs is that there are a lot of different types of brown dwarfs. Some of them are sort of more star-like Allie was just talking about. And then some of them are a lot cooler, and people tend to refer to them as failed stars because they don't generate their own energy. They sort of form and then fade out into existence for the rest of their very long lifetimes. And I study the atmospheres of those. So there are a lot of brown dwarfs out there, but most of them are very bright in the infrared. And so we have to look at them with telescopes that can see in infrared wavelengths. And yeah, I study their atmospheres. So the closest thing in our solar system to a brown dwarf is probably Jupiter, because Jupiter is sometimes referred to as similar to the sun because of its composition. But brown dwarfs are very similar to Jupiter. They're composed of a lot of hydrogen and helium, but then there are other chemicals that they have in their atmospheres that form really interesting clouds, which is one of my favorite things. So in Jupiter, you'll have clouds made of ammonium or water, but brown dwarfs are a lot hotter. So you'll have clouds made of, I don't know, iron. And if it rained, it would be more like a molten iron shower. Or you also get clouds made of things like corundum, which is where rubies and sapphires come from. So I really like studying all these weird clouds that you have on other bodies.
Yes, and it's almost as if there's a spectrum of atmospheres. I know I was also surprised to learn from one of our main atmospheric scientists who passed away earlier this year that there are salts that also rain out of Jupiter, or thought. There's this ammonium-based salts, as you mentioned. It's really rich kind of ammonium clouds, and things condense and fall out, and so you have I don't know if it'd be necessarily pellets of salt chunks falling on you if you could stand in the atmosphere of Jupiter, but salt rain just sounds painful.
Yeah, it's so interesting because on Earth we have clouds made of water, right? So you can have liquid rain, or if it hails, it's solid water. And you can sort of extrapolate that to these exotic atmospheres. So yeah, I guess on Jupiter, it would maybe rain like some salt on you. And then on a brown dwarf, if it was hail on a brown dwarf, it might like rain iron pellets on you. I don't know. Neither really sounds fun, but
Yes, another factor for astrobiology, what kind of life can survive iron rain pelting at you?
I know it's really interesting. I mean, I would love to personally like have the technology to send a mission out and like to see what like liquid gemstone rain would even look like. But of course, in my studies, I don't get that detailed with the atmosphere. Um, I mean, my models, they're one dimensional, but we do assume there's the liquid and the solid phase of all these different molecules, but it's just, I don't think it would be the same as actually getting to go there and like check it out.
Yes, and this just really highlights the importance of this type of art show where we are only used to liquid water rain. And so our minds really don't necessarily visualize, and especially me, I mean, I'm a little more of the hard rock geologist. I'm like,
You're a rock kid.
corundum clouds, like no, 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 like this is like, this aluminum oxide that's supposed to be in this sequence of metamorphic rocks. Like this shouldn't be raining out in the atmosphere. So we need those artists to help us visualize that, because sometimes our brains, or rather what we're just used to in the earth environment, kind of hard for us to really, like it's hard for me to really settle on of like, oh yeah, there's like rock material that's clouds as well. So I think that's where, the sci-fi covers, you get those renditions, the artist idea really kind of filling the parts of the void that our brain just wants to fill in with normal stuff that we see on Earth.
Yeah, definitely. That makes it really interesting to both study planetary sciences and astrophysics and paint it, because a lot of the things that inspire me, I mean, especially with my brown dwarfs, I just have, a point of light or maybe a spectrum, and I don't have a picture like we have of Juno, the Juno spacecraft taking all these amazing images of Jupiter. And so, I mean, I use what we can gather, what data we can gather from the solar system as inspiration, but then also I like to take that a step farther and paint things that we can't really see right now with our own eyes, at least not in the detail that I'd like. So yeah, that's sort of been my inspiration. I do take inspiration from the work that I do scientifically, and then being an artist as well, you're just able to kind of shut off that quantitative brain and you can just do whatever you want. And I mean, there are rules when you're analyzing data, like in my science work. And so art just gives me another perspective. I can sort of just paint whatever I want, and it's really fun.
Yes, I like your statement of the detail that you want, which both in the artistic realm, of course, attention to detail when you're actually completing it, but the detail we want in the data, which hones in on some of your work and mine too. We're looking in the infrared and we're only getting these certain infrared photons. We're not necessarily getting the resolution of well, wanting to see these, especially with the exoplanets. If we take a picture of a planet around another star, it might be like a pixel or two on the camera detector, right? We don't have the detail we like, which translates to resolution, where technology kind of comes in. So yet again, that's where the art can kind of fill that void and make it that detailed that you would like.
Yeah, that's definitely the best part about it. Well,
Yeah.
do you want me to answer any questions about art or painting, or do you want me to just start painting? I am down for whatever.
Let's yeah, so just to remind everyone that you can drop the questions in either the chat or the live Q&A, and I'll be monitoring them. So why don't you just go ahead and start painting, and we'll just kind of take them as they come along. I know you've got your different views here, so let's switch to your, I'm going to spotlight your art view. I'm glad that, yeah, so Zoom doesn't let you screen share too, but Laci's got an iPad, and that looks like the way to actually, yeah, that's perfect. And I'm going to mute your other one so we don't get feedback.
There.
Reverb. Ooh. Is it still doing feedback? Okay, let's see. Okay, so I think if I keep your iPad actually muted, I think the iPad was picking up the reverb, so we'll keep your audio on your main view and then just keep the iPad in um, the mute button. So,
Okay.
because
Yeah, that
there's no reverb on that one. Okay. All right. We gotta bypass the Zoom.
oh, Zoom. I was like muted on my laptop and then it was still giving me feedback and I was so confused. And yeah, I've never done this before either, but I have a nice stand for my iPad. And so I thought, how am I going to angle my laptop at this canvas?
Yeah,
But
this looks really good. This is making me realize we should have just had live art like all weekend. This looks awesome.
yeah, I got this mount and it's really helpful. So I have this little tiny, it's like an 8-inch circular canvas and I love painting Jupiter so much. I've painted Jupiter 4 times in 4 different mediums: spray paint, oils, watercolor, and acrylic. And I just thought, well, this would be perfect for Jupiter. So now I'm going to paint like my 5th Jupiter painting. But I thought I'd start that today because, like I said, they're the closest we have to brown dwarfs. They're failed stars, and it's Sunday. So I'm going to start this in oils. Let's see. I have so many colors. So the reference image is one of the newer images from Hubble. So here's the reference. I'm just going to keep this up on my phone. And I drew last night on the canvas sort of an outline because sometimes I just jump in and start painting, but other times I like to have sort of a map to guide me.
Yes, that's what I was asked. It looks like that is just a regular pencil, or do you use like shaded different?
No, I am not fancy at all, and I just use a mechanical pencil, the same mechanical pencil that I would use to like take an exam. Because I'm not formally trained, I feel like I just sort of approach things how I feel work for me. I sort of just go with my gut. I'm actually not that good at drawing. I've always considered myself more of a painter. And so I just sort of jump in. So if there are any, professional artists out there, like, sorry, I don't know what I'm doing. It turns out okay though.
I guess I kind of assumed because that's how I felt. I enjoy. For me, I actually my second, if I wasn't a planetary scientist, I would love to be a figure illustrator. I think making scientific for textbooks would be so fun. I like to more so draw them by hand, but that is, I feel like, just the starting point of just going into it. And I don't know if there is a perfect process. Maybe for really specific mediums or really specific tools, probably, obviously. But I kind of feel that approach too, where I'm like, I'm just going to start with what I see in my head and see what happens.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think space art is one of okay, this will be fun for me because first I've never painted live, and second of all, I don't usually talk while I paint. I usually listen to really loud music and just sort of, vibe out. So this will be interesting for me to do both of these at the same time. But I think space art is probably the most challenging type of art that I've tried so far. It's I've done traditional techniques in oil like you would do from an old, I don't know, what's his name, Rembrandt, like traditional Renaissance painting. And I've done where you do an underpainting and then you do your actual painting on top and you slowly build up layers and colors and depth. But sometimes, especially when you're painting a nebula, it just doesn't work like that because, if you look at different Hubble images, you'll have all these different colors and the background is essentially black. And so you can't go in, with an underpainting and in a bunch of different colors. It's just you have to approach it differently. So sometimes you can go in and like paint things in white and then do what's called a glaze and paint the colors on top. But in my experience, painting space is the most challenging thing. I really like painting landscapes, and so I sort of approach it like a landscape. So what I'm doing now is just putting a base layer of color in, and it'll probably smear my pencil a little bit, but it's oil paint, so you'll build up a lot of layers and it won't end up mattering.
So you bring up a good point about just the blackness of space, and I guess my mind went to, are there, shades of black within oil? I mean, we're dealing with oil here, but yeah, yeah, is there such a thing as shades of black within paints?
Yeah, and I I honestly don't know the difference between a lot of them, but where's my, so I have ivory black for my oils. There are a couple other blacks. I think there's a lamp black.
Hmm.
And I think it's probably just, you know how you can have black that may have a cooler undertone and it looks a little bluer? And
Okay.
you can have a black that has maybe like a browner undertone and it looks warmer.
Right. Okay. So yeah, you get like almost like a dark blueberry, like a purple black under there. I guess really for the human eye to register the shades of black, you got to paint them side by side. But if you're layering, maybe you can start to kind of see that. I hadn't thought about layering with the nebula of shades of black. That's an interesting point.
Yeah, so um, when I was talking on my camera earlier, I had the first nebula that I painted in oils was behind me, and it's on a canvas board. So it's not actually like the material of a canvas. It's on a board, and I ended up using a lot of medium in that and sort of letting gravity do the work for me. And I painted the crab nebula, and I would put some of this medium that was pretty viscous and just sort of like turn the canvas and let it flow downward. And that ended up working out really well. But I'm still experimenting with how I want to paint nebula. And I think every artist who paints space probably approaches it a little bit differently. And that also makes it interesting.
True. They might start that layering process slightly different, or maybe only use one shade of the black. But the Crab Nebula does seem almost like a perfect oils type of object with the burst and that kind of layering just in the structure of the astronomical object itself, which makes me realize that maybe there are mediums and types of paint that speak more true to like a, if you're trying to get across like a landscape kind of look, or more like maybe softness in different tones, like you're looking at like lunar regolith. I guess since we had International Observe the Moon Night, I still got the moon on my mind, but this like powdery couple feet thickness of material that covers the moon is like this powdery stuff versus we've got another neat piece in the show, showing the flows of Io, where you got this like nasty sulfur chunky lava flow
Ooh,
going on. Um,
yeah.
so so you
So
almost, yeah.
when I paint like a nebula, I always start with a canvas and I put gesso. I put black gesso on it, or I paint it all black. And so yeah, starting with a black canvas is really helpful, and just getting your like base surface to be black is probably the way to go. When I painted, I have a big Jupiter piece, but I don't have it in this room. So if anyone's out there, then you'll have to go see it on my
Uh,
Instagram.
yeah,
But
that was your 29. You had that in the show last year, right? I think you,
yeah,
yeah, the big one. Yeah.
that was the first oil piece that I did on my own. So most of my life I painted in acrylics, and I remember asking my grandma a week ago, like, "Hey, when did I start painting?" And
That was one of my questions for you. Perfect.
yeah, so I wish, okay, I was raised by a single dad. And so I wish he had a better memory because he can't even remember. He said, "Oh, I don't know, Laci, you just always had a paintbrush." It's like, can you be more? I asked my grandma the same question like a week ago, and she said, "You've always painted." Like, okay, but oops. Like,
Had to start at some point.
yeah. So I guess I just started painting when I was very, very young, like, I don't know, 4 or 5. And I mean, I'm sure when I was younger, we didn't have like very much money, so I was probably painting like with really cheap paints. I keep hitting my iPad. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. It doesn't look that bad when you hit it.
Okay.
It gives the live feel, you know.
On my end, it looks like
Crazy. Yeah.
Um, I remember painting mostly in acrylics though as I got older and, you know, when I was in high school, because acrylic paints are a lot cheaper.
Mm.
And I'm over here like mixing my paint off the screen. Sorry.
That's fine. It's part of the process.
Yeah, so I remember painting in high school, and I took all the art classes I could in high school. And um, I think I did paint with water-based oils during a high school course, but I never really got into oils because there are so many different mediums, and oils are, I don't know, they just seem like the scariest type of paints because you can't just mix them with water. You have to mix them with, I use what's called Gamsol. It's essentially a paint thinner that has to break down the oils in the paints.
Oh, okay.
And it's
Yeah, I
so
agree. I'm scared. I don't think maybe one day I'll graduate myself, but I agree. I'm afraid of that completely. Like, let me just stay in the watercolor world and stay safe.
Oh my gosh, watercolors are so hard. So I can paint now. I can paint in any medium. Okay, I'm painting like a really light layer of white here. It's probably really hard to see, but
No, you could see it.
because this band is a lot wider, so I just want to get a layer of paint on it, but I don't need it to be super dark right now.
Yes, and this is a good point to talk about these bands. We did look at Jupiter last night through the Mount Lemmon Sky Center telescope, and we could see the bands. The atmosphere was a little shaky, but these bands are essentially big equatorial regions where you get kind of like how the Hadley cell on Earth, we get these overturning kind of areas and jet streams. This circulation type of thing is happening with Jupiter as well. And the bands that you see here, so she's painting that white one there, they're alternating pressure regions. So you get high pressure, low pressure, high pressure. And at the boundaries of these zones, which is perfect that she's also painting the giant red spot right there, at the boundaries, is where these massive storms. And so, see if I'm remembering my Jupiter facts right, I think you can fit 3.5 Earths across the Great Red Spot.
You used to be able to.
Oh, yeah.
This is like, I'm so bad on the spot. So I feel like every time somebody asks me a question about space and I'm not prepared for it, I'm like, what? And I forget everything I've ever learned.
I know.
Yeah, I can't be the only one, right? I do remember that the Great Red Spot, yeah, it used to be just like you described. And apparently it's been shrinking over time. And so I don't think it's 3 Earths anymore. It might be closer to 1 or 2. You'd have to double check me, but it's shrinking.
No, you are correct. It is shrinking. It's probably something, not less than the 3 for sure. I do recall that now. Oh, yeah. We get so much information crammed down. If for those of you, the Lunar Planetary Lab is like the birth of planetary sciences. So our department's honestly pretty intense as far as the course loads, and we're responsible for calculating the entire solar system essentially. So easy to forget the facts. But I also heard, I'm glad you mentioned the getting smaller, is that it's also fainter and it's less red and it's more orange. And I heard, I don't know how serious, but some astronomers wanted to rename it to the Great Orange Spot since it wasn't red anymore.
Funny.
We can't do that. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, sure, it fluctuates. Oh, and then another fun fact about that is this is a storm that's been raging as long as we've been able to resolve it, meaning when Galileo just pointed a small refractor telescope up at Jupiter, he saw that, right? That was 500 years ago. It's the same storm. So this is like a giant hurricane, larger than Earth. Maybe it fluctuates, but quite scary in the grand scheme of storms. And it was, I guess, considered until we learned or it shrinked. Saturn has a massive storm as well as a polar storm that like is hexagonal shaped. So I don't know if the Great Red Spot or the faint orange spot, if we rename it, is more intense than the hexagonal storm of Saturn. But that's a fun one too. And I'm realizing, I don't know if I've seen art that anyone's painted the hexagon in our show. I feel like that'd be
that's on my list.
Do it.
I know. I have not painted Saturn yet. I just neglect. I just keep painting Jupiter, but I need to stop. Help.
I know, we all get in our little zones here. I mean, I uh, I was even messing around with, this was my little thing from last year where I made like asteroids. I'm like, okay, that's like the only thing I want to do is like make asteroids. But I was pulling out some of that art and uh, uh, just reminiscing of last year's show since I was going through some of the stuff from last year, which I will say was really sad. The past 2 days, I've been the only one here at LPL. They gave me an entire classroom to myself, so I haven't had to see a single soul, which of course is the safest. But walking out of the building at the end of the night has honestly, I almost cried the first night. I'm not gonna lie, it was dark. There was no one, and typically we'd have all the lights on, and we actually, if you guys have come to our physical show before, we got spot lamps, and we really turn the face of LPL into something different. And then of course there's hundreds of people throughout the each night, and every hour we're getting more people and coming and going. And of course the virtual is still fun, but we realize it's not the same. And I did take a picture of the big dark empty atrium because I also realized we don't have any art show 2020 photos.
Aw.
So I realized the photos that I have been collecting as I take pictures, like I took a picture of you working here, and I took a picture of the sun on the laptop earlier. And yeah, I realized the 2020 image slideshow is going to be obviously not as great when we look back at the other previous shows. This is the 7th installation of the Art of Planetary Science, and so there's these 6 other shows, hundreds of photos that we that I was going through also for some of this stuff, and I'm like, wow, the little things you take for granted, like how fun it was just to turn our department into something that it's not. So we're pretty lucky. And then another plug, I guess, for LPL and the art show is that one of the reasons that we've been able to turn our atrium into an art gallery is because of our director. He has to sign off on this. Timothy Swindle. He's been the director for almost 10 years after Michael Drake died. Another LPL history, Michael Drake was the one who originally proposed OSIRIS-REx, which is, of course, a sample return mission headed out of LPL and the University of Arizona. And unfortunately, Mike Drake passed away somewhat suddenly, I guess, to some degree after selection. So he got his mission and then unfortunately passed away. But so Tim kind of stepped in. They weren't necessarily trying to hire a director, but I think we really lucked out with someone who actually cared about outreach and, of course, art in addition to that, because this art show is, it's displaying art, but as you can see, it's actually largely a public outreach event in that regard. So we're pretty lucky that we've been able to turn our atrium, when we could safely, into a gallery display. And anyway, it's not the same, even though this is still really cool. Obviously we've had some of our attendees from around the world tune in over the weekend as well. Given their time zone differences, it's kind of amazing. And lastly, I'll say that we will be uploading all of these videos. So for all of our folk who couldn't jump online live, we'll have these on our YouTube channel as well. And that's the best we can do compared to for what it is, and not turning our atrium into a gallery. But I felt it looking at the big dark emptiness, and it had that 2020 feel.
That's that's crazy. I know it's definitely not been the same as previous years, and I mean I haven't left my house since March except to get allergy shots because I'm high risk and I don't want to catch anything. But yeah, this time of year, I'm used to like being on campus a lot more, and it's definitely disappointing. I think try to look at the positive side of things, and I think maybe more people were able to submit their art to the show this year from around the world because
Yes.
not a cost of shipping for them because it's just log in and submit, which has been really awesome. And I think we've reached a lot more artists this year as well. And I love seeing all the submissions and seeing new types of art and just new names that submit to the show. And
I
then
agree.
so many people in the world that are fascinated, maybe, doing something related to planetary science or astrophysics isn't, their career, but they love space as much as we do. And so they choose to paint it in their free time. And I think that's pretty cool.
I agree. I'll say one of my guilty pleasures for being an organizer for this show is um, watching the submissions roll in, which is slightly distracted when you're, trying to observe on a telescope or reduce data. But it is a really nice break. It was really awesome as when we had the submissions open. And it's like, I think James Webb Space Telescope shared, they already have an art initiative, which I actually was not aware of. They shared our submissions are open. And as you guys saw, I think we have, I don't know, Laci, 100 James Webb Space Telescope, and a lot of their
Yeah.
submissions, yeah, maybe less than 150 at least. And this is also there's other missions like the Psyche mission headed out of ASU. They also have art initiatives, and so a lot of people are already doing this, and they already have those international listservs. And so we really kind of got lucky that, yeah, well, this virtual show allows them to, yeah, $400 to mail your art to Tucson, Arizona, right? That's like not feasible for everyone. And so the silver lining is now, one, we developed, or rather our web developer. So thank you to Joshua Sosa if he's out there. I know he's been in and out through the weekend. We would not been able to do it without our webmaster for sure. But actually now we've developed an online gallery for the first time. There's no reason to just not allow an online gallery to continue. So there's, next year, if all goes well and we get to hold physical shows, there's no reason we can't also just have it online. So that's another thing that we could take forward after. You're like, yeah, take the good with the bad. We have a new international reach, and we have developed our website to actually host virtual art. Of course, it's our first time, and so we could probably even beef it up in some regard, depending on how much we want to have our webmaster. But we're really lucky that LPL is a big department. It's the Planetary Science Department at the university. And if you were with us yesterday, we had a lot of the LPL history. We're really lucky that we're beefed up and that we have capabilities to make that. I mean, we wouldn't have been able to do that if we didn't have our own Lunar and Planetary Lab server. So we're, still at the mercy of some things of LPL. But I agree, there's a new silver lining with getting some folk that we just wouldn't have got necessarily before. So I'm an optimist. I'll take that good. I'm like, well, something
Yeah.
to take out of that.
I mean, props to you, Allie, because you're the organizer, the main organizer, and you were able to not only switch it to a virtual format, but get all of these amazing events lined up. And that's a lot of hard work when you're trying to pursue a PhD. So I just want to thank you for all your, effort and contributions to this show, because I think it's a staple of the Tucson community, and now maybe can be a staple in more places than just our small little space community here.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's like I couldn't do it without the army of grad students behind me. As Laci knows, there's emails and PDFs flying and text and verbiage and purchase orders, and there really is a lot behind it. Our main leader, Jamie Millaro, Dr. Jamie Millaro, now she's graduated from LPL, but she set a lot of the initial structure in. And she quickly realized how much work it was to put on an art show too, and yeah, on the periphery, you're like, oh, this is so cool. And then you start getting in the weeds and you're like, oh, wow, there's actually a lot to really come in on. And arguably we could have had one virtual day, but I got a little carried away. I'm so happy to see so many people tune in at the different events, because I was like, oh no, maybe someone should have stopped me. This was a lot of virtual Zooming, and I didn't know how tired people of Zoom they are. So thanks for everyone for sticking out Zoom, and we had some audio issues in and out from yesterday, which is the #1 problem with Zoom. But I appreciate everyone attending a virtual show, because I know that you could just, quote unquote, tune out and just not pay attention to all these Zoom events. I think there's more and more public virtual events I've seen over the past few months. So it could be overwhelming. I think a lot of us grads have also noticed that being on Zoom for all of our classes and back-to-back meetings is actually, the days are seeming longer. I'm sure maybe people in other fields and realms are probably feeling that. So yet again, I appreciate everyone still coming on Zoom, because I know it actually is exhausting. You know, typically you'd have 20 minutes to walk between classes or your next meeting, or go get a drink and like walk outside for a second, or like see someone in the hall, or you know, many of these social things, as we're a little social species here, kind of fell out. And yeah, Zoom isn't necessarily the social thing that we need. So it was hard for us to navigate if this would be the right. We thought about just canceling it. You know, back in April, me and Laci and the other organizers were like, postpone, cancel, virtual. You know, we kind of floated between these three things. It definitely was an easy decision.
Yeah, I think the good thing is hey, you can get on Zoom, your camera's not going to be on, and you can watch a telescope viewing of the moon, and hopefully that was more appetizing to people than, okay, you have to log on to your course for Zoom and you have to sit at the desk with your camera on and you have to have shoes on and all these weird rules that different schools and employers are having for their Zoomers. So hopefully, yeah, the virtual, like, sit back and enjoy the show kind of entice people to come. Oh, okay, I see why I'm hitting it, because the brush is like hitting the stand.
Ah,
I get it now. I was so confused. I was like, I'm being careful not to bump it.
that's funny. It looks further away than that height, but yet again, perspective.
Yeah, it's actually really close. I wanted to try to get an angle where the light was coming in.
Oh
Um,
yes, yeah. Nice that you have the natural sunlight to actually show off that illumination.
yeah, luckily this room okay, we turned the second, the larger bedroom, the second bedroom in our house, turned it into an art room. Who needs a second bedroom? So this is my art room now, and it's amazing because I've always just, I've never had a space to paint, and so I would sit on the floor and put my canvas on my lap and have my acrylic paints next to me, and I would do all my paintings on my lap. So I didn't even have an easel until maybe like 2 years ago. And I mean, I've always painted as a hobby too. My primary focus hasn't been I'm painting and selling my art. It has been, wow, I'm so tired of doing problem sets all day. I would like to do something that's not a problem set, and then I would paint.
I agree. There's those long days of just brute force physics, deriving Kepler's third law for the 50th time in your life, type of stuff. And of course, it's all very useful and important. But yeah, I find myself mostly gazing towards the Catalinas sometimes, especially out of the LPL. You know, you like take a break and you go and look to the north side of LPL and you see the mountains, and you look back at your desk, you look back at the mountains, like, wow, I could just go to the top of Mount Lemon and not do my homework.
Yeah.
There are those moments, you know, we need those outlets. Again, these academia doesn't turn off at 5. It's not a 9 to 5, which I think there's some academic folk on a call right now. I'm sure they feel that as well. And so a lot of the time as space scientists, or as a rising space scientist, I'm sure, Laci, you get this all the time. What are you going to do after you graduate? You know, so there's like a,
Oh God, I don't know.
yeah, I know. And part of it is because if you're not in the weeds with academia, you don't necessarily understand, first off, what, you know, kind of, why would you? You're not doing it, the inner workings of it, but that there's actually these three trajectories. There's staying in academia after getting a PhD and becoming something like a professor yourself, climbing your way up to Regents Professor, right, and taking the full-on academic pursuit. Staying within the bounds of a university, which can be kind of safe. You know, they can, if you don't get grant money, you'll probably still get paid, especially if you're tenured, right? And then there's the little bit more risky of like, well, I still want to do science, but not with a department politics, right? I don't want to be a part of a university and have the structure of the university kind of overbearing, because it is. So you can go what we call soft money grant, which this is another neat plug for Bill Hartman, who started the Planetary Science Institute, another painful acronym for you, not so painful, but PSI. That's here in Tucson. And Bill Hartman, you've probably seen his space art. He has space art in the show. Yeah, he is a major space scientist and artist. He actually worked with Kuiper as well. So he's a big LPL piece. I think he might have been the second or third person to get a PhD out of LPL, something like that. Should probably know that LPL grad history, but one of the first, as far as that's concerned. And so you can take this route that's through something like PSI that we call soft money grants, where you still write your grants to NASA. You still say, hey, I want to observe this object at this time for this reasons because it's scientifically interesting because of X, Y, Z. Still do all that on your own. So if you don't get the grant, it's a little more risky, but if you're a very successful grant writer, you can go this soft money route, which I think is a neat way to still do science, but especially now with working remotely, the beautiful thing about soft money is that you could be anywhere. I mean, yeah, you could be in your art studio at home, which is also your office. PSI actually already catered very well to remote working, which is pretty neat. And then the third trajectory for when people ask us, what are you going to do after your PhD? Is to work in the industry. There's this budding space science industry, a little bit more on the engineering side of things sometimes, but you think your SpaceX jobs, which some of those commercial industry guys are maybe open to science, but there is a little bit of a divide versus space commercialization and actual space science, but hopefully that continues to change. Oh, and I guess the last trajectory is working for a NASA institute, actually being a part of that NASA family, as they like to call, and working at Goddard or working at JPL, or JPL is kind of an affiliate, but working at a more NASA-based center. But yeah, I'm sure Laci's getting that question all too much right now, so we won't ask her.
Don't do it, because I'll say fifth option, art, science.
I'm good. Well, see, and then
I don't
yes,
know.
that's I guess another thing is that we know it's important to visualize, and like, yeah, a space artist is still needed, and there's not that many planetary science textbooks, and so
Well, okay, I'm weird, and I really like writing about science more than I do I like science communication where I don't have to stand up in front of a bunch of people and answer questions. And so I feel like writing down through a textbook or some kind of technical writing to communicate different ideas would be really fun. Writing a textbook sounds fun to me. I really like science education too. And I'm actually the third person, only the third person in the whole history of LPL, our department, to pursue a hybrid degree in science and science education. So half of my dissertation is about science education. And then after completing my core classes and towards the end of my core classes and all the, exams that you have to take in this department, I just really needed something different. And so I forced myself to start painting again because, when you're in undergrad, when you're in grad school, you get really busy and sometimes you forget to make time for your different hobbies. And I actually stopped painting for a while, but I forced myself to start painting again. And I'm really glad that I did because it gives me a nice break. And I've taught myself all these other mediums, which has been, a different kind of challenge outside of sort of the academic realm that I'm in. It gave me sort of a challenge in my hobbies. And I think it's always good, no matter what you're doing in your life, to take time for something away from your work. And so that's why I started painting more, and I made a social media page last year. And I think that sort of gave me a reason to paint too, because I felt like I had to keep up with this page that I made. Otherwise, I would just, get done with school for the day and just go play video games or watch Netflix all day.
Right, this is still well, as we kind of talked about before with resolution and detail, this is still kind of keeping you in your science brain, but not as this intense, you have to calculate this to this decimal point for this graded thing. So yeah, I joke that work-life balance doesn't exist. There's just a buzzword nowadays, work-life balance, but with academia, it just doesn't turn off. I mean, yeah, I got done with the eventing last night, and I'm taking care of stuff, and I just thinking about asteroids at midnight at night, you know. So it's just like, you just can't really turn it off, you know. But it is nice to have the outlet to where I don't want to sit and think about calculating my asteroids at midnight, but it's more fun to make little models of them at midnight or paint them, you know, at the end of the day. So I
Yeah,
agree.
I also think so. I actually started in the science, well, the education department at U of A, and then I transferred into LPL to do this hybrid degree. And at the time I wasn't painting, and I had to catch up. I'd been taking a year of education classes, and I had to, switch back into my science brain because I have a bachelor's and a master's in like interdisciplinary physics. So it wasn't like I wasn't qualified, but I had been doing more like qualitative education courses for a year. And I transferred into the program, and I just wasn't painting anymore, and I just wasn't happy. And I didn't think I could be a scientist and an artist. I thought that I had to pick. And this was the same choice I had to make when I started college, which was a little later than most people. I started when I was 21. And
Me too.
oh, nice. Yeah, I remember now. I was like, oh, I'm old, but there are
Yeah.
other people that don't have the same path where you go to college when you're 18, and
Yes.
then you graduate when you're 22, and then you go to grad school, and sometimes it's just a different path for people, and I fell into that category. And I just didn't think I could be a scientist and an artist. And I remember when I transferred to LPL, that's when I heard of the Art of Planetary Science show. And I just thought this was so amazing. And that's when I started painting again. And to get myself into it, I was like, I'm going to learn how to paint in something different. And I picked spray paint. And I painted some really cool space art with spray paint. And it was really fun. And I put my art in the show. And that was the first time I ever really like showed my art to anyone. And when I had my art in the Art of Planetary Science, like this was maybe 4 years ago, or maybe 3 years ago, I walked around and I read the descriptions of other pieces, and I realized that I wasn't the only scientist and artist that existed. It's not like I thought I was, but I wasn't the only person balancing science and art. And like we were just talking about Bill Hartman, I don't understand how he can do such amazing things with acrylic paints, but he can.
He does. I love his little. He always puts his little astronauts, his little spacemen or woman. Yeah, nondescript when you're wearing a spacesuit. Um, but yeah, I love his little space people, and I'm always so amazed that he can make. I mean, it's like they're so lifelike and they're tiny, and it's acrylic. Yeah, he's got the whole scale perspective. Hartman is a big um, and you'll notice a lot of his images are little astro people walking around craters. He's a big there's basically one giant cratering paper that everyone quotes here in planetary science for age dating the solar system given like crater distribution and sizes. So Hartman is yeah, I mean he's like this major player. I'd have to look how many how many citations that paper has. I mean, it's got to be like in the hundreds. Everyone uses that, and then you look at his art, and you're like, wow, I'm in the crater. You know, these little astronauts are in the crater. I mean, he conveys it. Yeah, I can't imagine doing that with acrylic. Yeah, props to Bill Hartman. Check out his piece that he's got in the show. Of course, it's all every piece that we get from Hartman is really great. Last year, he actually gave a talk for us too, which was really fun to have him. And there's very few people around that actually still, worked with Kuiper. Hartman is one, and then yesterday, our another invited speaker was Steve Larson. Steve Larson. Steve Larson started at LPL when he was 17 years old. And then when I interviewed him for his talk, he had just turned 75 this week. I'm like, wow, 17 to 75, all at LPL.
That's
Um,
interesting. Such a rich
yeah.
history.
Yeah, so that was really cool. Oh, but I did want to double back on your statement with the science education and just hone in on the fact when we had Steve Kortenkamp, which is he one of your PhD advisors? Because he's one of the main science education leaders here at LPL as well.
No, he isn't. I did work with Steve, but and there's all these rules for your committee and stuff. And I did, my minor advisor is Chris Impey, who does a lot of science education over in Stewart. He does a lot of massively open online courses or MOOCs. So before the pandemic started, he did a lot of virtual education for adult learners. And my co-advisor is Dr. Oh my gosh, geez, Dr. Ed Prather, and he is very well known in the science education field as well. And I've done a lot of work with Ed, and I actually did a project with Steve. We haven't published it. What I soon found out is like, oh wait, I'm one person. I can't work 40 hours a week on education research and 40 hours a week on science research. So I had to finish my science education paper and then step away from science education to focus on my scientific work on brown dwarfs. So it's been, an interesting ride. And there's just like not, I already have too many people on my committee, and so I don't have Steve on there. But that, that's been a challenge too. Is when you're doing something so interdisciplinary, like you may have a lot of people in the room that are working in different areas, and they all need to agree upon like, okay, what are you gonna do, and what do we expect of you?
Yes, the committees. I just added another person to my committee, and I was like, I better cut myself off. I don't want too many voices in the room. Yeah, you gotta you gotta limit it. And luckily, our main PhD advisors kind of act as these mediaries for these big exams, and when we do our big final defense and whatnot. But yeah, in Laci's case, as she said, she's one of the rare types that has actually sort of at this point it's just paving the way and hope that more students take a science education component, obviously myself included in the care for science education outreach itself. But Laci's had to go up out of her way to like make sure this is an actual component within her PhD. Me, I get to do these events and outreach just on the side as I would like to, like topically. But yeah, it is rare to have a hybrid degree. And Molly Simon had just graduated with that. It's another graduate student you've probably seen around the art show. She used to help out. And
John
who was John who?
John Keller.
Oh, okay. That might have been before my my graduate time here.
Yeah, it was before my time too. It was a while ago, but I believe he's the director of a planetarium in Colorado now.
Oh.
And he's a really nice guy. I talked to him via email once just to ask him some questions, but he was a faculty member somewhere in California. I have a terrible memory with names, so I can't remember the university. But he was doing, physics education research, and was a faculty member in a science department, like either physics or astronomy. And then I believe in the last like 3 or so years, he accepted a position at a planetarium. And so, that's it. There's a lot of different paths in education as well. Like what you said, Allie, if you want to do something more of the outreach side, then there's the undergraduate education side, which is a little bit tricky and what I was trying to work on. And then there's K through 12. And what I have found out in my experience when I was in the education department here at the University of Arizona, there's a difference between science education research and discipline-based science education work, which it's not something that like exists in a definition anywhere. So I had to sort of find it out, and that's why I eventually transferred departments. But from a strictly education department, they sort of approach things differently. And if you're in a scientific department and you want to do education, it ends up being like completely different than the education department. And so the best way to sort of, this is my opinion, so I don't think necessarily it's like the only way or the best way, but for me, the best way was to be in a science department, considering my science background, and, talk with other scientists and use our expertise to try to, improve undergraduate education, improve those introductory courses that people take, and it just works better from a science department. And so you have people, you know, like Steve, who does science and science education work, and he's in a science department.
Right. Yeah. No, there's not a divide there, but it's slightly parsed out to some degree. Outreach versus science education, like in what you said, the undergraduate, which I will say, we had a decent amount of undergraduates show up for this online event because we gave them extra credit. So
That's
our
awesome.
Professor Kortenkamp, when he was here yesterday, he's teaching Planets 206 class, and I think one of the other professors is teaching Universe and Humans or something like that. And yeah, we had a few of them pop in, and so that was really neat to kind of get them because, and actually, I remember Ed Prather. I think we should invite Ed for a talk next year. I think one of the best presenters I've seen, hands down, ever in my life is Ed, and
Yep, he's so
he
great.
this has always stuck with me is that, you know what, these are the last classes that some of these people, science classes that these people take ever, ever. This is the last time that they're probably, if they're just going to
Yep.
go, if they're a psychology major, or they're doing business, or they're doing law, or, they're not doing the science trajectory, but they have to take the science, background classes just for like the degree, right? You take your science, you take your humanities and whatnot. And, this is the last time these folk will probably ever be in a science classroom. Like, what are you going to leave them with? What are you going to give them, and so that's kind of scary. You're like, wow, this
Yeah.
introductory astronomy course might be the last science thing they actually formally get for the rest of their life, and they're like 19, 20, right?
Yeah, it's crazy
So
when you think about it, and like you put it into context like that.
And so we got a comment from an attendee. We're coming up in the last few minutes here. So I'm glad that this person pointed this out because this is a big thing that happens in Tucson. So if you've never been to Space Fest, which is organized by Nova Space, you should definitely go. It was there that I discovered a whole huge tribe of scientists who are artists and vice versa. So yes, thanks for that attendee for calling out Space Fest and Nova Space. Nova Space is also a space-themed gallery. They actually are really connected with a lot of also astronauts who are artists. So an interesting perspective is the humans that have been in orbit around Earth creating art. We've had some of these artists that are a part of Nova Space and Space Fest by proxy since Nova Space puts on that Space Fest every summer out at Star Pass here in Tucson. Of course, I think they had some iteration of a virtual thing this summer. Maybe someone can confirm that. I know they canceled the actual event, but definitely go to Space Fest when it's an open and live component because, yeah, as this person points out, there's scientists there, there's astronauts there, there's the public there. Lunar and Planetary Lab, we usually go set up in the outreach room, the STEM room at Space Fest. So when it's out at the Marriott up on the upper level of the event, essentially there's a whole room where you find people like Laci and I and Osiris Rex, the folk from High Rise, TAAA that we had on before. I've seen them set up there. Pretty much every outreach group within Tucson will show up at Space Fest, at least the space or the science-based ones. The physics department, the math department, we all go set up in this big room, and the outreach room is free. You do have to pay to get into the rest of Space Fest. You can pay as much or as little for as in depth as you'd like to go. I.e., you can pay $1,000 to have lunch with an astronaut if you're so inclined. But yeah, Tucson, already had the space race era, happening, and part of that's due to Kuiper and the history at LPL and actually founding LPL. Side note, this building is one of the first things that NASA truly funded. Our building here in 1958. So thanks NASA for starting to fund things, LPL being one of the first things. And we realized that the Art of Planetary Science was actually tuning into a sphere that was already existing here in Tucson. Like I said, Bill Hartman at LPL creating PSI, being a huge space artist in general, having these astronauts come through. We actually have 2 astronauts that live in Tucson. When we were going to have our physical event, we did have an astronaut lined up to come give a physical talk, but he said, no, I don't want to do virtual. But that's okay. Next year, we might get some astronauts. But Laci, we want to see the finished product. Can you post it and we can repost this later? We're going to switch gears to our next presentation, but I am loving the area to the right of the Great Red Spot where you've got the brown.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I'm really seeing like depth at that contrast there. So if you could post that final product for us later. And I don't know if
I'll
you're
be like,
listing these for sale too, but I wish I kind of want you just to, can you paint the whole solar system on these little circular canvases?
I kind of want to. I didn't have any of these before, but yeah, this will take me a while to finish. This is gonna,
Yes.
it'll probably take me like, I don't know, 40 hours to finish this painting. But
Oh,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah, post
thank
the
you
finished
so much
product.
for having me, and
Yes.
yeah,
Um,
enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks
yes.
to anyone who tuned in. I appreciate
Yes.
it. I don't know how fun this is to watch, but
Yes. Well, this is our first time, a lot of firsts. So leave feedback, good or bad, after the art show. Maybe that's actually a thing. Maybe we'll open up a web forum to see what people really thought. I think that might be really useful. But yeah, send us the finished product. Thank you, Laci, and I'll see you virtually soon, I'm sure.
bye. Thanks, everyone.